High on a granite wall in the Black Hills, a man hangs in a leather seat at the end of a steel cable 500 feet above the pine tops, holding a stick of dynamite the size of a candle. Below him, a compressor hammers air through hoses that snake up the rock, and gray dust drifts off the holes he has drilled into the cliff, each stopped at a chalked depth. He cannot see inside the stone. There is no machine that looks through granite, so the only way to find a hidden crack is to drill into it and hope it is not where a nose is meant to go. What he is doing is engineering by demolition, and the surface he is shaping with explosives will one day be a human face 60 feet tall. From below, the scene would have looked almost impossible to understand. A man suspended against a vertical wall, a machine somewhere above him, another somewhere below, and between them, nothing but granite and open air. There was no comfortable platform from which to work, no modern lift carrying workers to a precise position, and no digital model telling anyone what the finished face should look like. Every decision had to be translated from a drawing into measurements, from measurements into drill holes, and from drill holes into controlled explosions. The mountain was not being decorated, it was being dismantled, and every ton removed created a new problem. The workers had to know not only what rock to take away, but exactly where to stop. Most people believe Mount Rushmore was carved. It was mostly blasted. About 90% of the 450,000 tons of granite that came off that mountain was removed with dynamite, and the men who shaped the president's faces were powder men and drillers, not sculptors. That distinction matters because the popular image of a monument usually begins with a sculptor standing in front of stone, patiently cutting away material with a chisel. Mount Rushmore worked almost in reverse. The roughest stages were the fastest. Explosives could remove enormous quantities of granite in moments. The danger came later, when the mountain began to resemble a face, and every remaining piece of stone became more valuable. At the beginning, a few inches did not matter much. Near the end, a few inches could determine whether the expression looked right or whether a feature disappeared forever. This is the story of how a plaster head in a studio became 4 faces on a cliff. It is the story of miners who learned to stop a blast an inch short of a finished cheek. It is the story of 400 men who hung on cables to shape a mountain and came off it alive. It is also a story about the difference between making something large and making something precise. A mountain can be broken apart with force, a face cannot. The closer the workers came to the final surface, the less useful raw power became. The operation gradually changed from massive removal to controlled removal, from blasting away whole sections to carefully weakening small areas and letting workers finish the last pieces by hand. The monument we see today hides that transition. From the valley, the faces appear smooth and deliberate. There is no visible record of the thousands of holes, the broken drill bits, the cables, the compressors, the blacksmiths, or the men who stood behind each measurement. But before any of it, the sculptor had to choose his rock, and the first stone he was offered would have shattered under the first charge. The whole idea began as a way to sell train tickets. A state historian wanted colossal figures cut into the Black Hills to pull travelers into South Dakota, and the site he favored was a cluster of granite spires called the Needles. On paper, they were ideal, tall, dramatic, already drawing visitors. Gutzon Borglum, the sculptor brought in to judge them, walked the spires and turned them down. The granite was thin and shot through with fractures, weathered into pinnacles too narrow and too cracked to hold a face. A charge set into that stone would not shape it, it would break it apart. That rejection was one of the most important decisions in the entire project. The Needles looked spectacular precisely because they were already standing in dramatic shapes, but spectacular rock is not necessarily useful rock. A monument of this size needed a massive block of stone that could tolerate being drilled, blasted, and cut without breaking along hidden weaknesses. Borglum was therefore looking at the mountain differently from a tourist. The tourist saw scenery, he saw structure. The question was not which mountain looks best, it was which mountain can survive what we are about to do to it. The second answer was to carve the way monuments had always been carved, by hand, with chisels and mallets and men on scaffolds. Every statue anyone could name was built that way, but nobody had built one this big. A face 60 feet tall in granite this hard would take teams of carvers generations, and the stone would blunt their tools faster than they could cut. Handwork could produce the detail. It could never produce the volume. There was another problem with hand carving. Before a worker could make a small detail, enormous quantities of granite would first have to be removed around it. Imagine trying to sculpt a 60-foot face by starting with a hammer and chisel while the mountain remains behind it. The detail might be possible, but the excavation would consume an enormous amount of time. The project needed two different kinds of work, something powerful enough to remove the mountain quickly and something controlled enough to finish a human face. The solution would have to combine both. So the answer had to be dynamite, the crudest tool there is, a thing that moves rock by the ton and cares nothing for a line on a drawing. And there sat the deadlock. Explosives could take the mountain down, but they could not be trusted near a finished surface, because one charge too strong or one hole too deep would blow the nose clean off the face with no putting it back. What broke the deadlock was not a bigger drill. It was a way of aiming. In his studio, Borglum built a plaster model of the four heads, 1/12 of the final size. On top of it, he fixed a flat plate marked in degrees, and from it swung a horizontal arm with a weighted line at its end. To fix any point, the tip of a nose or the corner of an eye, he recorded 3 numbers: the angle the arm was swung to, the distance out along it, and the drop of the line. The simplicity of the system is what makes it remarkable. There was nothing electronic about it, no satellite positioning, no computer-generated 3-dimensional model, no laser scanner could be carried onto the cliff to compare the work against the design. Instead, the monument depended on measurements that could be written down and repeated. A point existed first on a small plaster head. It was described by numbers. Those numbers were enlarged. Then a worker on the mountain could locate the corresponding point in space. In effect, the model became a measuring instrument for a mountain. And here, the problem inverted. The dynamite that should have destroyed the face became the tool that shaped it. Once a driller knew exactly where the finished surface lay, he could blast down to a line he could measure. The work could begin. 4 heads would stand on the cliff, each about 60 feet from chin to brow, 500 feet above the valley. And to make them, nearly the whole face of the mountain had to come off, roughly 450,000 tons of it. Before a visitor ever saw a recognizable face, the mountain would have to pass through an ugly stage. The cliff would be covered in scars and drill holes. Sections would project where they eventually needed to be recessed. Other areas would disappear completely. The workers were constantly moving between 2 scales of operation: the enormous scale of the mountain and the tiny scale of a facial feature. A forehead might begin as hundreds of tons of granite. Eventually, it would become a surface that had to meet a measurement. That was the strange rhythm of the work. Huge destruction followed by tiny corrections. That same stone nearly cost them a president. Thomas Jefferson was begun on Washington's right, and after about 18 months, the rock there proved too cracked to hold the detail. If the seam ran through the face, the surface could not be trusted, and if it could not be trusted, no careful blasting would save it. So the half-finished face was blown off the mountain, a year and a half of work gone, and Jefferson was moved to the other side and began from raw rock. It is difficult to imagine the psychological cost of that decision. 18 months of work had already turned a section of raw mountain into part of a recognizable human face. Then the discovery of unstable stone meant that all of it had to be sacrificed. There was no way to repair a bad piece of granite. The only solution was to destroy the work and start again. That is one of the central realities of carving a mountain. Mistakes cannot simply be patched. The material is permanent, but the work is irreversible. Drafting table follows the structures that were built and the men the record kept in the margins, and there is more of it every week. All of it, cable and air and honeycomb and charge, came down at last to one small piece of stone in each face: the eyes. A flat carved eye reads as dead, so Borglum left a post of granite standing in each pupil, a shaft about the length of a man's forearm, and shaped the eye around it. In sunlight, that post throws a shadow on one side and catches light on the other, and the eye reads as a living pupil with a glint. It is the most fragile thing on the mountain and the most deliberate. Blast away that one forearm of stone left standing on purpose, and the president goes blind. After all the explosives, all the drilling, all the massive removal removal of stone. The final effect could depend on something remarkably small. The eye is where the scale of the monument becomes almost deceptive. From the valley, the pupil looks like a tiny detail inside a huge face. But that small piece of granite had to survive the same process that removed hundreds of thousands of tons around it. It was not an accident that it remained. The mountain was therefore not simply being reduced. Certain pieces were being protected, while everything around them was destroyed. The most surprising number at Mount Rushmore, though, is not any dimension on the faces. It is a death toll. The number is surprising because the work itself sounds like a description of a disaster waiting to happen. Men were suspended over cliffs. Explosives were being handled close to unfinished faces. Heavy machinery operated above and below them. Rock could fall, weather could change. A worker could be surrounded by dust and noise and still have to understand the next instruction. The fact that the mountain was completed without a fatality among the workers who shaped it became part of the story, but it should not make the work sound safe. It was dangerous precisely because so many things had to go right every day for years. The men who shaped those faces were local. They were miners, loggers, and ranch hands from the Black Hills, thrown out of work by the Depression, most already fluent in dynamite from the gold mines in those hills. A working day meant climbing a wooden stairway of about 506 steps, strapping into a bosun chair, and being lowered over the edge to drive a drill while granite dust filled the air they breathed. The cold ended the season every winter, and the bare rock baked them every summer. Their experience mattered because the job required skills that did not come from a sculpture studio. These were men accustomed to hard physical labor and to the behavior of rock. They understood drilling. They understood explosives. They knew that a mountain could look solid while hiding a weakness, but experience could only reduce the risk. It could not remove it. Every trip down the cliff placed a worker back into the same environment: stone, steel, dust, height, and machinery. And every morning the work began again. Across 14 years, nearly 400 men worked that mountain, and not one of them died on it, a rare record for work this dangerous. What the granite dust did to their lungs in the years after is another matter, and not one the payroll addresses, because the payroll was written to record wages, not consequences. They were paid as much as $8 a day, good money in the Depression, which is why men kept climbing into the chairs. The monument therefore contains two histories. One is the history that visitors can see, 4 presidents carved into a mountain. The other is the history of the people who made that image possible. Their work was repetitive, physical, and dangerous. Much of it disappeared the moment the finished surface was reached. The mountain remembers the result. The records remember some of the workers. But the daily experience of standing on that cliff, hearing the drills and watching pieces of granite fall into the valley is much harder to recover. Then the ordinary deflation. The dignitaries stood on the platform, and the valley cheered, and the men who had hung on the cables and set the charges were mostly not there. Some were already up the mountain and the next face, some gone to other work. Borglum himself would not live to see the whole thing declared done, because it never quite was. The war took the money. Borglum died in 1941, and his son Lincoln shut the work down that autumn, the whole plan abandoned. There were meant to be torsos to the waist, and a great hall cut into the canyon behind the heads to hold the nation's records. Neither was finished. Nothing on that scale in solid stone was attempted in America again but once. A few miles away, Korczak Ziolkowski, who had worked briefly at Rushmore, began carving the Crazy Horse Memorial into another Black Hills mountain by the same honeycomb and blasting methods. It stands unfinished still. That unfinished quality is easy to overlook because the existing faces are so complete, but the original ambition was larger. The mountain that became a symbol was therefore also the surviving portion of a much larger plan. What remains is not merely the completed part of an unfinished project. It is the part that became powerful enough to stand on its own. Stand below the faces now and look up. The pupil that seems to follow you is a post of granite about the length of your forearm, left standing on purpose. The smooth cheek above it was hammered out of a honeycomb of drill holes. Behind the heads, a tunnel runs 70 feet into the rock and stops in the dark, a record hall that was never carved. It took a machine that multiplied by 12 and a man on a cable holding a candle of dynamite to put that stone exactly where you are looking. Look closely, and the monument becomes less like a single object and more like evidence. The smooth surfaces conceal the violence of the process that created them. The faces look calm because the work is finished, but the shape of every cheek, brow, nose, and eye is still the result of those decisions. A modern visitor can stand safely on the ground and see only the final surface. The workers experience the mountain from the opposite direction, from the face outward, suspended in the space where the finished monument would eventually be seen. When people reach for an image of American ambition in stone, this is the one they picture. And the reason is not patriotism. It is that 4 faces were measured off a plaster head and blasted true to within inches at a scale nobody had tried before. These were miners and drillers who learned to shape a face with explosives, remembered mostly as a line on a payroll, and the precision they hung on cables to reach still deserves recognition a lifetime later. The achievement is therefore not simply that the faces are large, it is that they are recognizable. Precision at scale is much harder. A mountain can be made smaller. Turning that reduction into the expression of a human face requires another kind of control. The workers had to know where the surface was supposed to be, how far they could safely remove material, and when to stop. They had no second mountain waiting if they went too far. Every face was the final face. That is why the monument can be understood as a record of measurement as much as a record of sculpture, not a carving, not the work of a chisel. A mountain blasted true to the inch by men who never called themselves sculptors and walked off it alive. And that may be the strangest thing about Mount Rushmore. The finished monument makes the work look inevitable. 4 faces appear to belong there, as though the mountain had always been waiting to become them. It had not. The faces were imposed on the stone through measurements, explosions, drilling, mistakes, corrections, machines, cables, and human judgment. The mountain resisted every step. The workers had to persuade it, piece by piece, to become something it had never been before. What remains is the quiet version of that process. 4 faces above the trees, apparently motionless, apparently permanent. But hidden inside the finished surface is the record of how they got there. A plaster model became coordinates. Coordinates became drill holes. Drill holes became controlled blasts. Controlled blasts became rough faces. Rough faces became details, and details became the monument. 400 men climbed into the mountain. The mountain came down around them, and when the work was finished, almost all that remained visible was the stone they had chosen to leave behind.